On this episode of the show, I have with me Sunita Verma. She's the CTO at Character AI. We're going to be talking about a lot of her leadership background, especially working in and around AI. She actually has a fantastic background, spent a long time at Google working on AI projects there, and now she's a CTO at a smaller startup, but consumer focused. And we're going to talk about some of the differences, having a narrow focus, being closer to development. And we're also going to touch on female engineering leadership. Sunita, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for having me, and happy to be here.
Absolutely. All right, before we dive in, tell us what you guys do at Character AI.
So, Character AI is the category leader in long form conversations with AI bots. And the company is building an AI native entertainment and exploration platform. What that means is people can go and create a character. They can provide a description, they can provide a background of the character, and either create a private character to have a chat with or make the character public so anybody else on the platform can have conversations with that character.
Very cool. Okay, so as I mentioned, you spent a number of years at Google working on a variety of projects, and before that, you worked at some larger companies, Symantec, Yahoo, Nortel. I'm sure somebody can go on LinkedIn and see all that too. But you've worked for larger companies, and I guess we'll talk about the transition to a startup. But working at a company such as Google, working on some of the type of projects you have that span further back with AI and ML. Talk to us a little bit to kind of frame the conversation, the kind of the scale, the scope of what you were doing at Google, so we can contrast that with kind of what your role is going to be now.
Yeah, at Google, I started working on large-scale distributed storage infrastructure, but I pretty quickly got interested in ML at that time and eventually took it all over to the AI. And I primarily worked on the applied side of the technology. And this is something that sort of resonates with my passion, which is leveraging technology to solve concrete user and business problems. So I worked in Google Payments for payments risk management. I worked in Google search ads business where I was leading the search ads quality teams. And then I led an area of Google called Core Labs, where I was working on both enterprise and consumer products from the ground up. And that was basically a ground up using Gen AI technology. So obviously the scale of work for a company like Google is very different from the scale of the work that I do currently at Character AI, but the work at Character AI stretches in a different dimension.
Interesting. I guess as you kind of look back and, I'm assuming that at Google, you have different resources available, different scales and different issues to deal with. You obviously are at a startup now, and we can maybe talk about leadership, and you've been at Character AI for under a year, obviously. When you kind of look at your initial 6 months to a year at Character AI, you look at some of the leadership attributes that you've brought to the startup, and you look at what you did at Google for 17, 18 years. Maybe if you could compare and contrast, what changes in terms of leadership? What is needed from a leader in both those roles?
So I think I'll start with character first, and I'll also give a little bit of background of my thesis of why I joined Character, and because that'll explain some of the things that I'm doing right now. One, I think I sincerely believe that generative AI is a very transformational technology. And in order to leverage the full benefit of the technology, any product or service will have to be thought from ground up. And what I mean by that is infrastructure, platform layers, product experience layers, potentially even business models will have to be rethought basically. And you're seeing some of this already play out in the chip space, in the cloud space, and so on. So the kind of, let's say, energy/leadership that is needed for a startup in this space is keeping abreast of what is happening in the technology and how to incorporate that technology really, really quickly in building a novel experience with AI that you can build. Because this is one thing that is going to be very, very different with the technology, that it'll enable new experiences that never existed before. So for example, talking to AI bots was not a thing before.
Mhm.
because there wasn't a technology that existed for it. And this is one of the key things that I see for myself as a leader, to unblock the teams in a way that we can actually take the learnings from AI or take the breakthroughs in AI and manifest them into the product really, really quickly. So that's the key part of the role. While in a larger company, the thing that we start with is how do we scale any experience to billions of users that exist on the platform? How do we basically deal with the ecosystem? Those are the kind of concerns that tend to be first order concerns when building product experiences and technology in those environments.
Something that I was just thinking about as you were, walking us through that was, you spend a lot of time solving those problems, the scale. You put a lot of energy in getting good at solving those problems. You mentioned now you're more focused on helping unblock some of those problems, bringing new perspectives, new, features, new products to a market that might not have existed. As a leader yourself, what have you had to adjust to? What have you had to kind of evolve through to kind of adapt and adopt more of what character AI needs from you?
So I think the I would say the muscle of not thinking about scale first, but thinking about velocity, thinking about innovation, and how to get that innovation out in the least friction way possible is the thing that I'm sort of pivoting myself towards. And once the least friction experience has been put out, then we are thinking about, okay, now that needs to scale because this particular feature has taken off. We need to figure out how to scale. We need to figure out how to make it like highly, highly performant. So that has definitely been a shift in my thinking.
Do you see yourself, and maybe, obviously maybe at Google as well, do you see yourself playing a different role within the product? Meaning, I know you're not the product chief product officer, you're the chief technology officer, but being so close to everything, the distance between, everyone is just less at a smaller company. Do you see yourself more involved in the product because of that?
So I would say it's slightly differently. I think the biggest advantage for a company like ours is to tie the technology, which is applied research in our case, and the product really closely in a very positive feedback loop. And what I mean by that is a large part of the value in the product is coming from the novel research that happens in the AI space and how to manifest that research in terms of new user experiences. And the product and the tech teams actually have to work very closely hand in hand in order to make that loop very short as well as very fast and positive.
I like that. I guess as you're kind of looking at that, narrow focus, and obviously in this case you mentioned, there is there is a research and development component. You are looking at, doing new things or re-envisioning things as you put it, and that muscle that you hadn't been able to use as often. How do you retrain that muscle? I guess you've been there now, a little bit under a year, but how do you actually get that muscle back functioning to the level you want it to be?
I actually probably had a little bit practice before coming to character as well. So the area that I was leading at Google Core Labs was an area where things had to be built from ground up. And the sort of like the remit of the products built was different, but intent was to rethink how you would build a product, AI native product, from ground up. So I've always been, at least I would like to think that way, and at least there's a feedback I have received throughout my career that I've always been a little bit on the edge, like in terms of innovation. I like to push the boundary of innovation, no matter what role I have been in. So, but yes, that must I needed. I've been sharpening that muscle as I've been working at character.
How have you been dealing with just being much? And I guess at your last role, Google, it kind of worked in different ways than maybe the rest of Google, so that definitely makes sense. But being much closer and being responsible for all of technology, all of engineering, How have you adjusted to being just closer to the engineering work itself?
I actually like being closer to engineering. I like being closer to where I can see a more direct connection between the work that I'm doing and the impact that it brings. And the set of responsibilities that I have are broader broader and deeper in a different sense. In the following way. I definitely have many more areas that I need to pay attention to. And I also need to go deeper into those areas. For example, compute management. This is high performance compute management. This has a much bigger role to play in a company like ours because large part of our workloads run on high performance compute. So how to think about that space, and any decisions you make in this area are going to have a direct bearing on the company. So just the road from or the distance between decision to how you see the impact of those decisions is pretty short. So I think you have to be much more, let's say, deeper into the space. You have to be much more connected with the space, and you just cannot leave those decisions. You cannot basically look at someone else to make those decisions for you. So in that sense, yes, it has been a shift, but I always liked being closer to the ground where decisions were being made.
Absolutely. I guess from, shifting from a company and obviously your last role within Google, a little bit different than the rest of Google, as you kind of outlined for us. You're at a company now where the focus is much more on delivering on a particular product, particular platform. Um, does that does that make your job easier, or does it actually in some ways make it harder? Because obviously, there's a singular focus of what needs to be delivered in terms of, at the last job, you're going through the ideation. If it doesn't work out, Google will just have you start over again.
So, in some sense, it makes it easier. And what I mean by that is focus brings a clarity of purpose. So, you know what you are building towards. In that sense, it's easier. But in one sense, it's harder as well because you know that is the sole focus. You know you are one of the key decision makers. You have to make sure you are making the right decisions because the company depends on it. So, yes, it's easier and harder at the same time.
Yeah, I could imagine given your role and your responsibilities now, obviously, and budget, right? I mean, obviously, the other aspect is you have less resource. It's natural for a startup to have less resource. Even a well-funded startup has to still be mindful. Google can potentially change its mind and it's rounding error for them. So there are definitely some trade-offs there. From the perspective of being a female engineering leader, obviously at Google, sounds like you were working on some instrumental projects. I am curious if you were to kind of look back at your time at these larger companies, were there a lot of people similar, like in terms of other female engineering leaders in these kind of key roles? Is that common? Because obviously, CTO of a well-funded, AI startup. I mean, that's a prestigious role, and I still don't know if we have enough diversity within that tier. But I guess from your perspective, when you look at female engineering leadership, talk to us a little bit about what you've seen and kind of the evolution.
Yeah, I would say unfortunately not as many as we would like to see or I would like to see. And especially as on the career progression part, there's we definitely I've seen this progression at many other companies and to some extent in startups that I'm seeing and as well. We start with a decent pool of women engineers, but I think as career progression happens, many of them drop out for various reasons. And at a point when you reach leadership positions, there are fewer and fewer women leaders, especially women technical leaders, that stay around in the field. And I would say that I would encourage. I've always sort of mentored women engineers, mid-level women leaders, and so on. And I would encourage more women to step in to this area, both because I think this field is here to stay. It's going to have a tremendous impact on our lives, both personal and professional lives. And by stepping in, we have an opportunity to influence the direction of the field.
Interesting. I guess from your perspective, you've had a long career within technology, and you mentioned obviously you start with a larger pool, and it obviously whittles down. What are some of the factors? And I know some of them are, life decisions. There's other aspects of it, but obviously you've made a very, you have a long tenured career. Any advice for other people, other female engineers looking to get into leadership to kind of be able to establish that type of tenure and longevity you have?
So I think this is something I used to tell other women back at Google and other places as well, is in early part of the careers, definitely optimize for a lot of learning, a lot of broad-based learning. So not just the project or the areas that you're working on, but get your head up and look around and connect dots between the areas that you're working on and area somebody else is working on. But the two key things that I have found to differentiate between women engineers who basically grow and thrive is one, calculated risk taking. So this is something that is more common in women, where we tend to be more conservative in estimating our abilities, and hence when there are opportunities, we are not the first ones to raise our hands. So calculated risk taking, and second, building a network of supporters and mentors around you as you grow through your career. I think just building and maintaining those relationships are extremely important, especially when you are stepping into new areas and taking on new responsibilities. They can be your sort of backstop. They can basically guide you, advise you, and so on. And it has happened multiple times in my career where I've taken roles that were probably beyond my capabilities at that time, but there were just this set of people who always guided me and mentored me and encouraged me to take those calculated risks.
Fantastic. I'm curious at this point in your career, who do you turn to for that type of mentorship, or if you have questions or you're hoping to have somebody be a sounding board, who's that person for you?
I mean, one person who has always been my side is by my side is my husband, who has always been a friend and as well to me. But I also have like professional friends, friends who have, or professional people who have become friends now, who there's a very core group of people that I always turn to for advice whenever I am having a crisis, or I am having, let's say, doubts or questions about what I should be doing next. And because they understand me, because they know where I come from, their advice has always basically worked well for me.
Final question, just out of curiosity. When you were looking to make the move from Google to character AI, and obviously, I understand you have various roles at Google, and some even, even this last one that kind of gave you some of the muscle in the product side. But when you were looking to talk to people to understand, hey, I'm making this big transition from one of the top 5 biggest tech brands on earth, and I'm going to a startup that's innovating and doing something interesting. I guess not having worked for a startup for a while, or maybe ever, like how did you get a chance to kind of evaluate that? Because I think a lot of people that work at big companies sometimes hesitate. So I'm curious, because I think that would be maybe valuable for others to hear.
Well, I did hesitate as well.
That's fair. It's a
but
big move.
but one of the things I was seeing with the arc of this technology is that the shifts that the technology will bring about are going to be tremendous. I wanted to also learn the deeper side of the technology, to be closer to the technology. So those were the reasons that guided my decision making. And then the question was, where do I go for that? One of the third things that I also strongly believed in is, it is going to be very important to basically rethink the experience with this technology and not try to do a bolt on in some cases, to basically get the full value of what this technology is able to deliver. And for me, was that if I tried to get an answer to these questions, the questions was, where would this kind of a need be best met? And the answer that came back to me was, I think I need to be in a startup environment to be able to, I want to be at the ground level to be able to build something from ground up with this technology. And character is the category leader. Character created this category of being able to have long form conversations. And my belief was, hey, if AI agents, we are going to be interacting with AI agents, both in our personal and professional lives going forward. And long form conversations and having conversational intelligence in those agents is going to be a thing. Why won't I be there? So
Absolutely.
that was sort of my decision making process.
Very cool. I love it. Sometimes when you get that glimpse of the decision-making process, I think it brings a lot of value to people. I really do appreciate your time. Thank you for being on, Sunita, and chatting with us. If somebody did have a follow-up question to something you mentioned on the show, what's a good way of touching base with you?
My LinkedIn is a good way. Finding me on LinkedIn would be a good way to get in touch with me.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
We'll make sure to include that. That's it for this show. We'll be back again, different guests, different topic. Until then, two things. One, Sunita walked us through a lot of details within her decision making of why she took this role at Character AI. And obviously, she left behind some innovative projects, but she actually jumped to something even maybe more challenging and innovative. And we talked a little bit about female engineering leadership and being closer to development. And Sunita walked us through some of the challenges and kind of having to redevelop the product mindset muscle. And please share this episode with others that might benefit from it. I'd really appreciate that. Like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.